I've always believed that the secret to surviving old age is rhythm. Not the kind you find in music, but the kind you build with your hands and keep with your feet. I'm 82 now, and every day of my life follows a cadence I've had since before my wife passed. It's a quiet rhythm. A bowl of oats at 6:30. A walk to the post office by 7. I move slowly, a consequence of the stroke I had 2 years back, but I move, cane in hand, like a man who still has a place to be. Lunch is at noon sharp. Then I work in my little shop in the back of the house until 4, fiddling with broken clockwork from neighbors who still trust my hands more than digital junk. Some say it's pointless now, repairing what can be replaced. But for me, restoring something old is an act of memory, of defiance. The house I live in is the one I built with my wife, Lenore, when we were newly married. Every floorboard, every beam, I hammered with my own hands. It overlooks Maple Bay, a quiet stretch of coastline that hasn't changed much in 50 years. We raised our son here. We buried Lenore's mother here. We planted the cherry blossom tree that now leans a little too far into the neighbor's yard. It leans the way I do now, proud but weathered. The neighborhood has thinned out over time. Most of the original homeowners have passed on or moved to sunnier places. But I've stayed, stubborn as the wind that rattles my shutters in April. Some say I'm too old to live alone. They forget that solitude is only dangerous to those afraid of silence. My son Caleb doesn't visit often, maybe once or twice a year, usually with Scarlett, his wife, in tow. Both of them always looking pressed for time and too polished for the creaky porch and weathered doorframes of this house. Caleb was always different from me, sharper in some ways, less grounded in others. Where I value consistency, he chases momentum. Works in real estate or finance, I can never quite remember which. Our last real conversation was 3 Christmases ago, when he called to say they wouldn't be coming. Scarlett had the flu, or maybe it was food poisoning. Either way, I remember saying, "It's all right," and hanging up before the disappointment could settle in. But even without family nearby, I'm not alone. Janetta Crowley lives 2 houses down and brings me banana bread every Thursday. Her daughter Sonia works at the care facility on the other side of town and checks in now and then. Dorian Patch, my oldest friend, comes by with his usual stack of newspapers and unsolicited advice. And then there's Zeke Howell, the nurse from Hollow Brook, who helped me get my balance back after the stroke. Young man, strong spirit, quiet eyes. He doesn't visit as much anymore, but when he does, he always brings my favorite tea. The clocks in my shop tick differently now, louder, I think. Not because the world is quieter, but because I've become more attuned to every second that passes. That's what age does. It sharpens your ears for the little things, the drip of the faucet, the creak of the stairs, the shuffle of feet on your porch that don't belong. Every day I sit at my bench with magnifiers over my eyes, gears between my fingers, and silence all around me. It's not a lonely silence. It's the kind that speaks, the kind that reminds me I'm still here. That Tuesday morning started like all the others. Toast, newspaper, pills. I was adjusting the escapement on an old German mantel clock when I heard the low hum of an engine outside. I paused, then the crunch of tires on gravel, the sound of a car door, no, 2. I moved to the window and pulled back the curtain. A sleek black SUV had stopped out front, brand new, too shiny for a little street. When the doors opened, I saw them, Caleb and Scarlett, my son and his wife, the ones I hadn't seen in nearly a year. And just like that, the rhythm cracked. I didn't move from the window right away. I just stood there, cane in hand, watching Caleb slam the door of a sleek black SUV and adjust his blazer like he was heading into a client meeting. Scarlett came around the other side, tugging at her oversized sunglasses and holding a handbag that looked more expensive than everything in my living room combined. She didn't even glance up at the house, not at first. When she did, it was the kind of look you give to an old chair you're thinking about throwing away. They didn't look like family paying a warm visit. They looked like strangers evaluating a property they might inherit. I walked to the door slowly, my left leg dragging just a bit more than usual. The clock oil still clung faintly to my fingers, but I didn't bother to wash up. I opened the door with the smile I reserve for polite company, calm, thin, and distant. Caleb stepped forward with that fake warmth in his voice I'd come to recognize over the years. "Dad, you're looking steady." He hugged me with more pressure than affection, like he was testing how brittle my bones had become. Scarlett lingered just behind him, her smile stiff, her tone syrupy. "It's so good to see you again, Ellis." I nodded and stepped aside, watching her hesitate on the porch before finally crossing the threshold, as if unsure whether her designer boots should touch my hardwood floors. "We thought we'd surprise you," Caleb said as they stepped into the living room. "Just passing through and figured, why not check in on the old man?" I tilted my head slightly. "An unannounced visit? That's rare." He grinned, trying to change that. But I heard it, that slight edge in his voice, the one he got when he was selling something. "Come in," I said. "I've just put the kettle on." They settled in like they owned the place. Caleb sprawled comfortably on the edge of the couch, while Scarlett's eyes darted across the room, pausing on the mantel, the sideboard, the grandfather clock I'd built for Lenore the year Caleb was born. I moved into the kitchen, not just to make tea, but to gather my breath. I hadn't seen them in almost a year. Not since my last birthday, when they showed up late, left early, and filled the time between with polite disinterest. That day had felt like a scheduled chore, not a celebration. This one felt no different. When I returned with the tray, I noticed the silence. They were whispering before I came in. I was sure of it. But now they sat smiling, their cups ready. "How are you, Dad?" Caleb asked. "Everything okay with your health?" Scarlett leaned in with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. Concern, or at least a good imitation of it. "Any falls? Any scares?" she asked. I sipped my tea. "Still here, aren't I? Doctor says I'm in good shape for a man who's had a stroke." I walked to the post office, fix clocks, eat on time, no complaints. Scarlett smiled and tilted her head. "But what if something did happen? You're living alone. That can be risky." I tapped the panic button on my wrist. "This calls emergency services. My neighbors check in daily. Janetta brings pies. Seth brings my paper. I'm far from forgotten." Caleb frowned slightly. "Seth? Janetta? Friends," I said. "People who still know what the word means." They both chuckled, but the sound was hollow. I could feel the undercurrent, the probing, the calculation behind every word. Scarlett said something about the news. Caleb brought up a Netflix series. I let them talk, but the room felt heavier with every passing second. It wasn't just awkwardness, it was something else. A quiet tension. Like the calm before something breaks. When the conversation began to run dry, I asked, "Will you be staying for dinner?" Caleb perked up. "Absolutely, in fact." He glanced at Scarlett. "We'll cook." "Give you a break." I raised an eyebrow. "You cook?" Scarlett stood quickly. "We insist. Just show us where things are." I didn't argue. I pointed toward the kitchen, listed off the cabinet locations, and leaned back in my chair. For the next half hour, I listened to them clatter around like tourists trying to play house. It didn't sit right. In the 30 years Caleb had been an adult, he'd never once offered to cook for me. Not after Lenore died. Not when I was recovering from the stroke. Not once. But here they were. Helpful, generous, overly sweet. Too sweet. Dinner was chicken breasts and vegetables with rice, overcooked and underseasoned, but I ate it. I even thanked them, because I needed to see where this was going. And it didn't take long. After we cleared the dishes, Caleb leaned back in his chair and said it like it was no big deal. "We'll be staying the night, by the way. We brought a change of clothes." He didn't ask. He announced it. "Of course," I said slowly. "Guest room's upstairs. First door on the right." He smiled like we were playing a game. "I remember. Grew up here, remember?" I nodded, but inside I felt something colder settle in my chest. "You grew up here," I thought. "But somewhere along the way, you forgot everything this house ever meant." They carried their bags upstairs like they were moving in. I stayed in the living room, the tick of the mantel clock loud in the silence. It was the sound of time and of something being set in motion. Something I hadn't yet named. But I knew it wasn't good. That night, sleep didn't come. I lay in bed with the ceiling fan humming above me and an ache behind my eyes that had nothing to do with age. From upstairs came the faint sound of voices. Caleb and Scarlett talking behind a closed door, like teenagers plotting something they shouldn't. Every so often, Scarlett would laugh, soft and clipped, like she was rehearsing a scene for someone she didn't respect. I turned onto my side and stared at the wall, the weight in my chest growing heavier by the minute. There was something about their sudden visit, about the way they looked at the house, at me, at each other. It wasn't worry I saw in their eyes. It was calculation. But I told myself I was imagining things, that maybe I was just too tired, too old, too used to silence. By morning I was back in the kitchen, scrambling eggs, setting out 3 plates like I had done 1,000 mornings before. The smell of coffee and toast eventually drew them down from the guest room. Caleb strolled in like he'd lived there yesterday, saying good morning like he meant it, while Scarlett came behind him in soft slippers and a smile just sweet enough to sting. She complimented the food, offered to help clean, even asked if I slept well, like we were part of some happy little tradition we'd never actually had. I kept my answers short, polite. But inside I was watching everything. We moved to the back porch after breakfast, the bay breeze cool against our faces. Scarlett crossed her legs, her sunglasses perched just above her forehead, pretending to admire the yard. Caleb sat with his elbows on his knees, sipping from his mug like he was timing a conversation that had already been rehearsed. And then he asked it. "So, Dad, how are you really doing?" That one word, really, told me everything I needed to know. I didn't look at him, I just said, "I'm fine." But that wasn't enough. He gave me a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, the kind he used when he was selling an idea. Sure, he said. But the stairs, the tools, the workshop, it's a lot for one person, especially someone recovering from a stroke. Scarlett leaned forward slightly, her voice soft and smooth like lotion. "We just worry about you, Ellis. It's not about age, it's about safety. What if you fall? What if something happens and no one's around?" I let her words hang there for a moment, then tapped the panic button strapped to my wrist. "That's what this is for. And Janetta checks in every morning. Seth brings my paper. I'm not exactly isolated." Caleb nodded but didn't back off. "I know. It's great that you have good neighbors, but they're getting older too, and they can't always be there. That's why we started looking into options. Just ideas, nothing final." Scarlett reached into her bag and pulled out a brochure, glossy and oversized, and laid it gently on the table between us like a folded flag. "Hollowbrook," she said. "It's beautiful. Private suites, gardens, medical care, everything designed for dignity." I stared at the cover but didn't pick it up. I didn't need to. I'd seen this tactic before, not with me but with others. The friendly concern, the casual suggestions, the talk of what's best for someone who's lived longer and seen more than either of them ever will. Caleb cleared his throat. "We toured it last week. They said they might have a spot open soon. Not saying you have to take it, just think about it." I leaned back slowly, my cane resting against my knee, the breeze fluttering the corner of that brochure like it was itching to blow away. "You know what's funny?" I said. "I haven't heard from you in 10 months. Not a visit, not a phone call, not even a birthday card. But suddenly, here you are, cooking dinner, asking about my health, handing me full-color marketing materials for a place that charges $5,000 a month to keep the lights on and make sure no one chokes on soup. And you're telling me it's because you're worried?" Scarlett's smile faltered just for a second. "We've been busy, Ellis. You know how life gets." "No," I said calmly, "I don't, because I make time for people I care about, even if it's inconvenient." Caleb tried again, leaning in. "Dad, come on, we're just thinking about the future. You don't have to decide anything now." I met his eyes. "I already did." I said no. The silence after that was heavy. Scarlett looked away. Caleb's fingers tapped the armrest of the wooden chair. "You're going to make this difficult," he muttered, just loud enough for me to hear. I stood slowly, took the brochure and placed it back in Scarlett's lap. "This wasn't a visit," I said. "It was a soft pitch with a side of scrambled eggs." Scarlett looked down, her jaw tightening. "That's not fair," she whispered. "This is love." I gave her a tired smile. "Then maybe you should have led with that." And I turned and walked inside, cane tapping the floor, heart pounding harder than it should have. Behind me I heard them whisper again, Caleb's voice low, Scarlett's voice sharper now. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. I knew what they were thinking. I knew what they were planning. They hadn't come for me. They'd come for what was mine. I went through the motions that night like muscle memory. Locking the doors, folding the kitchen towel, turning off each light one by one until only the warm hallway glow remained. My cane echoed against the floorboards as I made my way to the bedroom, the familiar creak of the floor following every step like an old companion. I took my medication, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the photo of Lenore on the nightstand. Her smile always caught me off guard. Full of belief, full of love. I whispered to the frame, "You'd see through them, wouldn't you?" And I already knew her answer. I climbed under the covers but left the bedside lamp on. Something in me refused to be swallowed by the dark just yet. And maybe it was luck, or maybe something deeper, but the sound came right when I was drifting off. Floorboards above. Then the faint hush of voices, as if they believed the walls wouldn't carry their schemes. I froze. Their door creaked open. Then the soft rhythm of footsteps descending the stairs, cautious and quiet, like a thief unsure if the house was asleep. I sat up and swung my legs over the bed, the bottle of pills still in my hand. My body was stiff, my heart thudding a warning. But I stayed still, lights off now, just the faint hallway glow guiding my ears. And then I heard Scarlett's voice, hushed, sharp. "It's the perfect setup. The house is dated, but the neighborhood's in demand. If we sell to a developer, they'll tear it down and pay us full lot value. Easily 6 figures. Caleb's voice followed, lower, more uncertain. "You think he'll agree to leave? You know how he is. Stubborn as a brick wall." "That's why we don't give him a choice," she said. "We present it as concern. If that doesn't work, well, we use what's already there. He's had a stroke. He's over 80. If we get a doctor's letter about cognitive decline, we can file for guardianship. We don't even need full power of attorney, just enough to start signing." There was a pause. My hands clenched around the pill bottle so tightly it nearly cracked. Caleb sighed. "Hollowbrook said they can take him in 2 weeks if we make a deposit. I already put money down, just need a signature, his or a guardian's." Scarlett's voice dropped. "Serious now? Then that's the plan. We come back next week, we bring the forms, we act like it's for his benefit. If he refuses, we push the dementia angle. We'll say we're worried about his safety. He won't fight hard. He's tired. He'll fold." And then, as if that wasn't enough, Caleb added, "The Buick's in good shape too. If we detail it and sell to a collector, that alone could cover half the cost of the facility. We just need to get everything in our name before he figures out what's happening." That was it. That was all I needed to hear. I leaned back slowly and shut my eyes, forcing myself to breathe through the storm rising in my chest. They weren't just considering a nursing home. They weren't gently suggesting a better life. They were orchestrating a transfer, a hostile one. Behind my back, with paperwork already underway, money already moved, my own son and his wife. Plotting to sell the home I built with my own hands. Take the car I've spent decades caring for. Strip my life down to a room in a facility and then tell themselves it was for my own good. They didn't see me as a man anymore, just an obstacle to be managed, a name on a deed, a body in the way of profit. I didn't sleep after that. I just sat there, upright in bed, the photograph of Lenore still staring back at me from the table. I whispered to her again, "They think I'm weak, that I won't fight back." I placed the pill bottle down carefully, stood and reached for the small notebook I kept in my desk drawer. My legs ached, my spine cracked like old wood, but my mind was clear, maybe clearer than it had been in years. If Caleb and Scarlett wanted to play games, they had forgotten who raised them. They'd forgotten I built this house without a dollar of help, that I buried my wife without breaking, that I recovered from a stroke because quitting never made it into my blood. If they were preparing to take everything, I needed to prepare something they didn't expect. And I would do it quietly, thoroughly, with the same precision I used when restoring a clock. I scribbled the first item on the list, talk to Dorian, then the next, bank visit, then call Janetta. Plans began to form in the margin spaces between fury and focus. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to outthink them, outsmart them, outlive their schemes. Let them come back with their fake concern and notarized documents. Let them bring their pens and their brochures and their sweet little lies. I'd be waiting. The next morning, they were all smiles again, acting like nothing had happened, like the conversation I overheard wasn't already echoing through my mind with every glance they exchanged across the breakfast table. Caleb asked if I wanted him to take a look at the leaky faucet in the workshop. Scarlett complimented the view again, said the light in the kitchen reminded her of Tuscany, as if she'd ever been to Tuscany. I played along, nodded in the right places, smiled when expected, because once trust is broken, the only power left is what you choose to reveal. And I chose silence. They packed their bags after breakfast, said they'd be back real soon, and made sure to remind me to give Hollowbrook some thought. I nodded again, not giving them anything to work with. Scarlett gave me a hug, the first and only time she'd ever done so, and Caleb placed his hand on my shoulder, squeezing it like he was already saying goodbye to something he owned. I watched them climb into that sleek black SUV, watched them wave from the driver's side window like dutiful children, and I stood on the porch waving back like an old fool. But as soon as they turned the corner, I turned toward the one place in this world that still felt like mine. Janetta Crowley's front porch. She was taking out the trash when I arrived, wearing one of those knitted sweaters she always made for church potlucks, her round face already tilting into a smile when she saw me coming. "Ellis Granger," she said. "I saw that fancy car leave just now. Company?" I leaned heavier on my cane than usual, more from anger than pain. "My son and his wife," I answered. "First time I've seen them in months." Janetta narrowed her eyes. "And what do we owe the pleasure?" "That's what I'd like to find out," I said. "But first, I need to talk to Sonia." She blinked, then nodded slowly, catching the seriousness in my voice. "Come on in. The coffee's still warm, and I made cranberry scones this morning." Her kitchen smelled like cinnamon and something sweet, the air thick with comfort I hadn't realized I missed. She poured 2 cups, handed me a plate, and sat down across from me with her hands folded, waiting. I told her everything, from the strange warmth of Caleb's visit, to the awkward dinner, to the conversation I overheard through the walls. I watched her face darken with each detail. She didn't interrupt. She didn't need to. The truth was enough. When I finished, she reached for her phone and dialed her daughter on speaker. "Sonia," she said, "you still working the desk at Hollowbrook?" "Of course, Mama. What's going on?" I leaned in. "This is Ellis Granger," I said. "I need to know if a man named Caleb Granger or his wife Scarlett have been in contact with your facility, specifically regarding me." There was silence on the other end. Then the faint sound of typing. "Give me 1 sec," Sonia said, her voice tightening. "Yes, they spoke to our director 3 days ago, asked about accommodations, paperwork, move-in process. They said their relative was declining, couldn't live independently anymore. They even put down a deposit to reserve a room." My hand clenched around the coffee cup, the warmth now burning instead of soothing. "Have they submitted anything official?" I asked. "Medical forms? Consent signatures?" "Not yet," Sonia said. "They scheduled a meeting for Monday to bring in the rest. They'll need either your signature or a guardian's, assuming they can prove incapacity through a doctor. But Ellis, they've already started the process. They're acting like it's a done deal." Janetta reached over and touched my wrist. "You're not going anywhere you don't want to go." Sonia's voice returned, gentler now. "Legally, Ellis, they can't move you without consent unless they have a court-appointed guardianship. And that's a long, messy process. As long as you're mentally sound, no one can force you into anything." I nodded, more to myself than to them. "Thank you, Sonia. That helps. A lot." When the call ended, I sat back in my chair and let the truth settle in my bones. Caleb hadn't just considered this. He hadn't floated the idea. He'd acted on it. Behind my back. Before he ever saw my face, he was ready to erase me, reduce me to a signature, a name on a file, an inconvenience to be transferred quietly to a room with soft lighting and an adjustable bed, all while planning what to do with the house, the car, the clocks, my life. Janetta stood and walked to the stove, her back to me as she refilled the kettle. "Ellis," she said softly, "I don't mean to speak out of turn, but your son, he wasn't visiting. He was positioning. And you can't face this alone." I nodded again. "That's why I need Dorian." "Dorian Patch?" she asked, glancing over her shoulder. "The lawyer?" "He's still the sharpest man I know," I said, "and I need someone who knows how to make things official." She placed the kettle back on the burner and walked over, placing both hands on mine. "Whatever you need, you've got it." As I left her house and stepped into the crisp afternoon air, I knew something fundamental had shifted. This wasn't just a breach of trust. It was a betrayal in its purest form, slow, calculated, and wrapped in the language of love. And if Caleb thought I'd just hand over my life without a word, then he never really knew me at all. By the time I got back home, the house felt different. Same floors, same clocks ticking on the walls, same view out the kitchen window. But something invisible had shifted, like the center of gravity had moved. The space no longer felt like a place of rest. It felt like a battlefield waiting to be drawn. I didn't take off my coat. I walked straight to the back room where my old rotary phone still sat next to the wall calendar. I picked it up and dialed from memory. Dorian Patch's number, untouched by time or technology. It rang twice before I heard that gravel-lined voice I hadn't heard in over a year. "Granger," he said. "Thought you'd forgotten this number." "I need a favor," I replied. "A serious one." There was a pause, then the quiet click of a chair. "Tell me everything." I sat at my workbench and let the truth spill out. Every detail. From the surprise visit to the fake concern, from the brochure left on my table to the midnight whispering I wasn't meant to hear. I told him about the deposit at Hollow Brook, the guardianship angle, the plan to move me before I could stop it. Dorian didn't say much, didn't have to. He listened like a man collecting ammunition. When I finished, he cleared his throat. "So your own son's circling you like a vulture, and he's already got pen to paper. Damn. I want to make sure I'm not easy to corner," I said. "Legally or otherwise." "You came to the right man," he replied. "I'll draw up a temporary revocation of any assumed guardianship rights. We'll secure the deed, block any access to your bank accounts, and log every document you sign from now until this blows over. And Ellis, don't sign anything, even a Christmas card." "I wasn't planning to," I said. "He told me to come by the next morning, said he'd already cleared his schedule. Bring your ID, bring anything they've given you, and bring that iron will of yours because this isn't going to be pretty." I hung up, exhaled, and stared at my reflection in the darkened window. The man looking back at me wasn't broken. He was bracing. I grabbed my coat again and stepped outside. There was one more person I needed. Someone inside the system. It was a short walk to the house on the next block. I knocked twice before Janetta opened the door again, this time wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Didn't expect you back so soon," she said. "Come in, I saved you another scone." "Not for me," I replied. "For Sonia. I need her help. Again." Janetta smiled faintly. "I'll call her." 15 minutes later, Sonia arrived. She worked the early shift at Hollow Brook, so her uniform was still crisp, her hair tied back, face alert. She sat across from me at the table, and I laid it all out again. The timeline, the documents I suspected were in motion, and the kind of betrayal no father should have to explain. She didn't flinch, didn't sugarcoat. She nodded slowly, processed everything like a professional, then gave me what I needed. "There are two kinds of power in a facility like ours," she said. "The official kind, legal documents, guardianship, deposits. And then there's the human kind, who's on your side when the doors close." She pulled a card from her purse and slid it across the table. "This is Zeke Howell, head nurse at Hollow Brook. I trust him. He's seen worse than your son, and he has no patience for coercion." "Will he talk to me?" I asked. "If I ask him to," she said, "and he'll do more than talk. He'll keep his eyes open, his mouth shut, and his phone ready. If they try anything when they think you're alone, he'll be there." I tucked the card into my coat pocket like it was gold. Because in that moment, it was. "There's more," Sonia added. "I can flag your file in the system. Quietly, if anyone tries to move it forward without your explicit consent, I'll know. That buys you time. Not forever, but enough to stay ahead." I stood slowly, heart thudding with something that felt like control. "Thank you, both of you, for not treating me like an old man who doesn't know which way is up." Sonia smiled. "Mr. Granger, you're the sharpest person I've spoken to all week. Don't worry, we'll make sure your signature means something." As I walked home, the streetlight started to flicker on, casting long shadows over the sidewalk. The kind of shadows that follow you but never catch up. I knew the road ahead wasn't just about legal filings or facility deposits. It was about something deeper. A test of presence. Of memory. Of how much of yourself you're willing to reclaim when others try to erase you. I wasn't just calling allies. I was drawing my line in the sand. And for the first time since Caleb showed up with that empty smile, I didn't feel cornered. I felt ready. The next morning came too early for an old man with too much on his mind. I skipped breakfast, grabbed the manila folder I'd prepared overnight, and headed out before the dew had even lifted off the grass. My appointment with Dorian Patch was at 9 sharp, and I'd never been late to anything in my life. Not even grief. His office hadn't changed in 20 years. Same cracked leather chairs, same crooked blinds, same faint smell of old books and older coffee. But Dorian, he looked sharper than ever. He motioned for me to sit and held out his hand. "You've brought paperwork," he said. "Good." I slid the folder across the desk. Inside were copies of every relevant document I could find. House deed, vehicle title, my will, even an old notarized letter Lenore had written me on her deathbed. Dorian reviewed each sheet with the intensity of a man scanning for traps. "Smart to bring all this," he muttered. "You'd be surprised how many folks your age trust family a little too blindly." "I was one of them," I said quietly. He tapped a pen against the edge of the folder. "All right, here's what we're going to do. First, we lock this house down. I'll draft a declaration of intent, something stating that you are of sound mind and have no desire to transfer ownership, guardianship, or residence. You'll sign it in front of a notary. That way, if they try to claim diminished capacity, we've got a time-stamped legal block." I nodded. "And the will?" "We'll amend it," he said. "They're probably expecting to inherit everything. We'll introduce a clause that triggers an automatic disinheritance if they attempt to remove you from your home without consent. That'll scare them off, or at least make them hesitate." I leaned back in the chair, letting that settle. "And what about banking access? I don't think they've tried anything yet, but—" "We'll call your credit union today," he said. "Put a flag on the account. No joint access, no third-party withdrawals. You'll be the only one who can move anything, and we'll get a statement delivered directly to you every month, in print." It was more than I'd expected. Better. Tighter. Dorian wasn't just a lawyer, he was a firewall, and he was building it fast. We spent the next hour reviewing signatures, drafting the new documents, and even calling in his secretary to arrange the notary. He was 3 steps ahead of every question I asked, and 5 steps ahead of the ones I hadn't even thought of yet. As we wrapped up, he handed me 2 stamped envelopes and a folder. "Keep these safe. 1 copy at home, 1 at Janetta's. If they pull anything shady, you've got the ammo." I stood, reached for my cane, and offered him my hand again. "You ever get tired of saving people like me? Only when they stop fighting." He said, "And you, Ellis Granger, you're just getting started." By noon I was back on my porch, folder tucked under my arm like a sword sheathed in paper. I made myself lunch, something simple, and sat in silence while the kitchen clock ticked louder than usual. But there was one more thread I needed to pull. I opened my phone and scrolled to a number I hadn't used in a while. Austin Poe. My old friend from the Watchmakers Guild. Retired now, but still sharp. And more importantly, married to a woman who worked in county records. When he picked up, he answered the way he always had. "You bring me a busted Rolex, or are we just catching up?" "I need intel," I said. "Serious intel." He whistled. "Must be important. What are we talking?" "I want to know if my son or Scarlett have filed anything with the county in the last month. Real estate filings, power of attorney forms, probate triggers, anything." There was a pause. Then Austin said, "Give me 2 hours." I spent those 2 hours cleaning out the drawer in my hallway table. Not out of necessity, just to keep my hands moving. I found receipts from 1983, a rusted key I still didn't recognize, and a postcard from Lenore on our 40th anniversary. Her handwriting was looped and soft, and the words, "You make life safe," felt like a punch to the ribs. By the time the phone rang again, I'd nearly forgotten what peace felt like. "They filed a quitclaim draft," Austin said. "Not submitted, not notarized, but it's sitting in the system under a pending status. It transfers the deed from your name to theirs, jointly." My throat went dry. "They're really doing it." "They're trying to," he said, "but without your signature or proof of incapacity, it won't go through. Yet." "And what about anything else? They've also run a title search on the house," he added, "which means they're prepping for sale. Checking liens, boundaries, ownership, standard stuff when you're getting ready to list." I leaned against the wall, the weight of it all pressing down like a second gravity. Thanks, Austin. I owe you. You owe me nothing, he said, but you might owe yourself one hell of a counterstrike. As the sun dropped lower behind the bay, casting orange streaks across the floorboards, I knew what came next. No more waiting. No more listening behind doors. If they were moving pieces behind the scenes, I'd drag the entire game board into the light, and I'd make damn sure they remembered who taught them how to play. It was time to stop reacting and start planning. I'd been one step behind Caleb and Scarlett from the start, surprised, insulted, blindsided, and I was done playing the old fool. I didn't just want protection. I wanted leverage. I wanted to walk into the lion's den with gasoline and a match, not a prayer and a cane. So I called Austin Poe again, but this time I wasn't just looking for information. I needed a co-conspirator. He met me that afternoon at Janetta's, our unofficial war room now, with a notepad, a thermos of black coffee, and that same spark in his eye he'd had when we were clockmakers reverse engineering antique movements. "All right, General," he said, setting his thermos down. "What's the plan?" I spread out the folder on the dining room table. "We give them everything they want, but on my terms." He raised an eyebrow. "You're going to let them take the house?" "No," I said. "I'm going to make them think they already have." The silence that followed was thick, curious. I explained it step by step. We start by drafting a fake letter from a family estate advisor, announcing that the property title has been pre-transferred into a trust, one that can't be broken until my death. The letter would be professionally formatted, signed with a real name, and mailed to Caleb and Scarlett directly. That would give them the illusion that their grab had already succeeded. In their minds, I'd become a passive placeholder, still in the house but no longer in control. Austin nodded slowly, absorbing it. "You give them the illusion of victory, so they let their guard down. And while they celebrate," I said, "we tear down every foundation they've built." We moved on to phase 2. I would quietly withdraw most of my savings, spread it into 3 separate accounts under different banks, with monthly transfers to a local credit union in Janetta's name, just enough for living expenses and property taxes. If Caleb or Scarlett tried to probe the financial side, they'd find breadcrumbs, nothing more. Meanwhile, Dorian Patch would continue filing defensive legal measures, including a revocable living trust with me as sole trustee and beneficiary. The property would remain in my name, protected under new documents they wouldn't even know existed. But the most crucial part of the plan, the part that would make or break everything, was deception through helplessness. I would begin slowly and intentionally to play the role of a man slipping. Not completely, not dramatically, but just enough for them to relax. Forgetfulness, feigned fatigue, the occasional missed detail when we spoke. I'd let them think I was losing grip so they'd stop watching me so closely. "Ellis," Austin said, "are you sure you want to go that far?" I met his eyes. "If they think I'm weak, they'll underestimate me. That's when I'll strike." We spent hours refining the plan, poking holes in every step until it held water. Austin would handle the false document and have his niece, a paralegal in a law firm 2 towns over, format the letter and envelope. Janetta would scan and store backup copies of every document we produced, and Dorian would play his role quietly from behind the curtain. I wasn't just protecting myself anymore, I was setting the stage for the finale. That night, I returned home under the orange haze of sunset, feeling more alive than I had in years. Not because of revenge, not because of anger, but because I finally had clarity. For so long, I'd been moving through life like a man fixing clocks no one wore anymore. Now, every second felt like it mattered again. I stood in the middle of the living room, looked around at the furniture Lenore had once picked out, and imagined Caleb and Scarlett walking through it like vultures surveying a carcass. I wouldn't let them win. Not because I hated them, but because they had already tried to erase me while I was still breathing. That kind of betrayal didn't deserve tolerance. It deserved strategy. I took out a yellow notepad and started writing. Every task, every phase, every actor in the plan, I listed it all and taped it behind the framed painting in the hallway where no one would think to look, just in case. Then I made a second copy and slid it into the old Bible on the nightstand. Redundancy wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. The next morning, I called Caleb. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey, Dad, Everything all right? I made my voice just slightly slower, like I was forcing my mind to keep up. Yes, I just got something in the mail. A letter. It says the house was pre-signed into some sort of trust, something about estate consolidation. There was a pause. Not a long one, just long enough for a man to smile to himself. Oh, he said. Yeah, that makes sense. Sometimes those things get automated. Right, I said. Guess that's what I was told. I didn't remember signing anything. You probably did at the bank, Caleb said quickly. You know how they bundle documents. I can check for you if it helps. No, I said, playing my part. Just confused, I guess. Thanks, son. We hung up, and I stood there staring at the phone. I could almost feel the air shift. If this were chess, I'd just moved my bishop. And Caleb thought I'd fumbled a pawn. The hardest part of the plan wasn't legal. It wasn't financial. It wasn't even emotional. It was pretending to be weaker than I was, to wear vulnerability like a disguise. For a man who'd taken pride in his independence his whole life, there was nothing more humiliating than faking incompetence. But if I wanted to finish this game on my terms, I had to look like someone who didn't even know what game he was in. So I began the act, slowly, subtly. I let Caleb catch me asking the same question twice in one phone call. When Scarlett dropped by, I stood in the kitchen looking confused about where I'd put the sugar, even though I'd kept it in the same drawer for 25 years. I started writing reminders to myself on sticky notes and leaving them in plain sight. One said, "Call doctor about memory pills." Another read, "Caleb equals POA," with a question mark circled twice. I didn't need to tell lies. I just needed to leave breadcrumbs they'd be eager to follow. And they did. Caleb began calling more often, not with warmth, but with curiosity. Scarlett started showing up unannounced, offering to help with the mail or tidy up the cabinets. I let them. I even thanked them. I let myself slouch a little more in my chair. I took longer to find my words. One afternoon, I forgot the code to my garage keypad and called Caleb to help reset it. When he asked how I'd managed before, I just laughed and said, "I guess that part of my brain's gone soft." The key was never overplaying it. No theatrics, just a slow leak in the facade. Enough to make them confident I wouldn't notice what they were doing behind the scenes. I even left my insurance folder out on the kitchen table one day, when I knew they were dropping by. It looked accidental. It wasn't. They were falling for it. Completely. But while I played the doddering old man, the machinery behind the curtain kept spinning. Austin kept tabs on county filings. Dorian drafted final versions of the disinheritance clause and got them notarized. Janetta began archiving everything in both digital and hard copy format. We had backups of backups, redundancies mapped out like a vault. My home was a stage, and my life a script they thought they were directing. But I knew how the final act would end. Still, pretending took its toll. One evening, after Scarlett had left a casserole and a smile that didn't reach her eyes, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the floor for 20 minutes. The truth was, I hated every second of this charade. I missed Lenore. I missed being seen as sharp, capable, solid. But I wasn't doing this for pride. I was doing this because people I loved once had looked me in the eye and decided I was no longer useful. And now they thought they could erase me without a fight. I'd rather die standing than live on my knees. That week, Caleb suggested they bring in a little extra support, someone to help me around the house. I pretended to be flattered. I even smiled and said, "Only if she's pretty and patient." He laughed. Scarlett smirked. I knew exactly what they were trying to do. In-home care, especially under false pretenses, was often a soft entry into legal guardianship filings. A step toward controlling finances, medical decisions, or, in this case, housing transfers. But I beat them to the punch. I called the agency myself the next day and hired someone, not a nurse, but a housekeeper named Clara, who lived 3 blocks away and had known me since she was a teenager. I told her everything. She agreed to play along. She'd sweep the porch, wipe the counters, make tea, and confirm my confusion when Scarlett inevitably asked if I was doing all right. It worked beautifully. 2 days later, Scarlett cornered her in the driveway and asked, "Is he doing okay? We've just noticed some changes." Clara glanced toward the house and whispered just loud enough, "He forgets where he puts things, but he's still got fire in him." Scarlett smiled, and it chilled me to see how pleased she looked. They thought I was fading. But the truth was, I was sharpening. Every visit, every call, every concerned suggestion they made, I logged it. I kept a small black notebook behind the radiator vent in the hallway. Dates, quotes, tone of voice. It might never be needed, but if this ever reached a courtroom, I'd walk in with a folder so thick it could snap the hinges off a desk. One night, as the storm clouds gathered over the bay and the wind rattled the windows like fists on a door, I sat alone and whispered to the darkness, "You taught them ambition, Ellis. Now teach them consequence." The night before I left, I stood in the hallway for a long time, just staring at the grandfather clock. It was one of the last pieces I ever built from scratch. Walnut casing, custom brass weights, hand-etched pendulum. I'd made it for Lenore the year we bought the house, and it had stood in that corner for nearly 4 decades. The tick of it filled the silence like an old friend whispering, "You're doing the right thing." The plan had to be quiet, precise, no grand announcement, no goodbye notes, just absence, like mist evaporating from the glass. That morning, I'd let Clara in a little earlier than usual. I handed her a sealed envelope and said, "Give this to Scarlett if she comes by and asks where I've gone. But wait at least 6 hours before opening the door." She nodded. "Do you want me to say anything else?" I shook my head. "No, let the silence rattle them." At 7:10 a.m., I pulled the old suitcase from the top of my closet. It was smaller than I remembered. One of those leather-bound kinds with the brass locks and a smell like old libraries. I packed lightly. A few clothes, my watchmaking kit. The folder from Dorian. The title to the house, safely tucked inside the spine of a hollowed-out Bible. And of course, the keys to Janetta's lake cottage, where I'd be staying until the storm passed. Austin Poe met me 3 streets down in a borrowed pickup truck. He didn't ask questions, just nodded, helped me into the passenger seat, and drove like we were heading to the post office. By the time Caleb arrived that afternoon to check in, the house was quiet. No creaking floors, no kettle on the stove, just Clara folding laundry with the front door locked and the windows shut tight. When he knocked, she called through the door. He stepped out for a bit, said he needed air. Scarlett came 2 hours later, her voice sharper, more urgent. "Clara, is he okay? He hasn't been answering his phone." But Clara held her ground. "He said he'd be back soon." That's all I know. By the time they realized I wasn't coming back, it was too late to follow. I spent the first night at the lake cottage watching the water shift under moonlight. It was quiet, not the lonely kind, but the kind that lets your shoulders fall for the first time in weeks. Janetta had stocked the fridge and left a blanket on the recliner, with a note that said, "Use the time well. Heal before you strike." I did. Over the next few days, I moved like a man who had never been watched. I walked through the nearby town without looking over my shoulder. I wrote letters I didn't send. I made tea and didn't listen for footsteps. But I also kept busy. Austin and I filed the legal motions from a different county to throw them off. Janetta helped finalize the property lock and forwarded calls from my old line. We moved quietly, methodically, like clock hands turning toward midnight. Meanwhile, back in Stillwater, Scarlett and Caleb were scrambling. They visited the house multiple times, tried to get the locks changed, called my old doctor to ask about mental evaluations, which, of course, triggered an alert through the legal notification network we'd set up. Every step they took tightened the rope they didn't know they were standing in. I left one more thing behind. On the kitchen table beneath the sealed envelope Clara handed them was a simple message. "You were right. I forgot something. I forgot who I raised." It hit them harder than a slap. 2 days later, Janetta forwarded a voicemail to me. Scarlett's voice, panicked but rehearsed. "Ellis, if you're hearing this, we just want to make sure you're safe. No pressure, of course, but the house, it's sitting empty. And there are bills. We'd love to help. Just call us." I didn't. Instead, I called Dorian and asked if the security deed had cleared. He confirmed the house couldn't be touched without my notarized consent. Not by kin, not by court, not by coercion. The bank wouldn't even issue a balance inquiry without my voice print. I had vanished in every way that mattered. They didn't know where I was. They didn't know what I knew. And they sure as hell didn't know what came next. As the sun dipped behind the trees and cast long shadows across the porch of the lake cottage, I sat in silence with my tea and whispered, "You wanted my life. Now you'll get a lesson instead." The real escape wasn't physical, it was psychological. I'd stepped out of their story and written my own. 3 weeks passed. Long enough for them to feel safe again. Long enough for Caleb to start sniffing around the mailbox and Scarlett to begin weaving tales to the neighbors about Dad's little memory trip. I knew the routine. Discredit first, then disappear the victim second. But what they didn't realize was that I had spent my life building clocks, and this one was winding up for the strike. It started with a letter. Handwritten, folded into thirds, and delivered by courier to Caleb's workplace. Inside, a single sentence. "There's a difference between silence and surrender. You've confused the two." I imagine his face went pale. I imagine he read it 3 times, then crumpled it with the same fists he used to gesture through lies. That was just the overture. The real blow came the next morning. Scarlett arrived at the Stillwater County Clerk's office to inquire, politely, about updating the deed status. She even brought cookies. Southern charm, weaponized. But what she got instead was a photocopy of the Declaration of Legal Intent, the amended will clause, and a formal notice that any unauthorized transaction on my behalf would be considered fraud, punishable under state and federal law. She left without her cookies. Meanwhile, Austin and I had set the second phase in motion, a civil motion for protective oversight. Not against them, but for me. It was filed in a county where they held no influence, under a judge who owed Dorian 2 favors and a bottle of Glenlivet. Within 48 hours, a certified letter hit Caleb and Scarlett's mailbox. The court has been made aware of recent attempts to usurp property, medical decisions, and financial access under false pretenses. You are being monitored. Any further coercive behavior will result in full restraining measures. Boom. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to show up at their doorstep with fire in my eyes. I just needed to remind them, legally and unmistakably, that I was not the man they thought they could bulldoze. I was still Ellis Granger. Still sharp. Still standing. And then came the audit. Scarlett had been quietly siphoning small funds, not from my accounts, but from shared utilities and expenses we'd once set up when Lenore was alive. Nothing criminal, but enough for Austin to flag it. We sent her a letter through a third-party firm, stating that repayment would be expected in full. Attached was a spreadsheet with every cent highlighted, documented, and time-stamped. Scarlett went silent after that. Caleb, on the other hand, tried one last move. He showed up at Janetta's door pretending to be concerned. Said he was just trying to make sure I wasn't being manipulated. Janetta let him talk for 27 seconds before holding up a phone and saying, "Ellis is listening." He froze. I didn't say a word. Just let the silence crawl up his neck. Then Janetta smiled and shut the door. That night, Austin met me by the docks. We sat in lawn chairs drinking hot cider like old men who'd just watched a bad storm pass without a single shingle falling off the roof. He looked over and said, "You ready for the final move?" I nodded. "Let's list the house." "But you're not selling, right?" "Of course not," I said. "I just want them to know it's mine to sell." The listing hit public records the next day with my name on every line. Not theirs. Not joint. Just Ellis Granger. And I priced it high. Insultingly high. A message disguised as a transaction. If they'd been holding on to a fantasy about inheriting that house, this snapped it like a twig. The phone calls started the following week. Scarlett tried once. Caleb never did. But the voicemail she left was full of syrup and strain. "Hi Ellis. Just saw the listing. Totally unexpected. If there's anything we can do to talk, I mean, as a family, please let us. We just want what's best." I didn't call back. But I did send her a copy of the flyer, printed in color, bold letters across the top. No trespassing, not for sale to liars. I signed it. In the end, revenge didn't look like fire or fists. It looked like control. It looked like boundaries set so clearly they glowed in the dark. It looked like 2 people realizing they'd underestimated a man who used to fix clocks because they'd forgotten that time always catches up with everyone. There's a special kind of silence that follows a failed heist. Not the loud kind filled with shouting or slammed doors, but the stillness that settles when schemers realize they've been played by the very man they tried to bury. That silence surrounded Caleb and Scarlett for days after the listing went public. I imagined them sitting at their kitchen table, phones in hand, looking over emails and documents, rereading the fine print they had once ignored, realizing none of it, not a single thing, was in their name. And then came the letter. Not from me. From Dorian. He drafted it on cream-colored paper, with embossed lettering that looked expensive enough to hurt. It read like a condolence card, but one that grinned between the lines. To Caleb and Scarlett Granger, this letter serves as formal notice that all matters of inheritance regarding the estate and personal holdings of Mr. Ellis Granger have been legally revised. At present, there are no beneficiaries listed under your names. Kindly refrain from further inquiries. Scarlett called Dorian's office twice. Left a message both times. Neither was returned. And Caleb, he emailed me. Subject line, "We just want to understand." I didn't open it. Austin did. Read it out loud while we were watching the game. "Dad, this all seems like a huge misunderstanding. Scarlett and I were never trying to take anything from you. We were just trying to make sure you were safe. Please, don't let a few missteps erase everything we've built as a family. We love you." Austin burst out laughing. "That's rich. Built what? Lies?" I shook my head. "They don't love me. They loved what they thought I'd leave behind. But I had already left something behind, just not for them." Months earlier, while Caleb was busy plotting guardianship and Scarlett was counting money that wasn't hers, I was quietly amending my will. Dorian and I spent a full afternoon going through it, line by line, stripping their names out like rusted nails. In their place, we inserted 2 organizations that meant something to me. A scholarship fund for underprivileged watchmakers, and a small foundation that supported stroke survivors rebuilding their independence. Every dime, every asset, every piece of land, gone from their reach. I even left a note to be opened after my death. Not sentimental, not dramatic. Just truth on paper. "You taught me what family means, and what it doesn't." Back in Stillwater, rumors began to swirl. Neighbors stopped waving at Caleb. Scarlett's real estate ambitions dried up. Word had gotten around that the house was not only off limits, it was protected like a fortress. One neighbor, Mrs. Delaney, even called to tell me she'd overheard Scarlett at the farmer's market saying, "I don't know what he's thinking. He's not even using the money." She was wrong. I was using it, just not on them. Janetta helped me fund renovations on the lake cottage. New siding, updated kitchen, a proper garden in the back. I donated anonymously to the church that hosted Lenore's memorial. Set aside a small trust for Clara. And I took a trip. Just one. Austin and I drove cross-country for the first time in 20 years, retracing the same route we took to the National Clock Convention in 1982. We laughed. We drank coffee at gas stations. And for the first time in decades, I didn't check the rearview mirror. When we got back, I found another envelope in my mailbox. No stamp, just a folded note in Caleb's handwriting. "Dad, we're sorry. We didn't mean to hurt you. If there's any way we can talk this through, please let us. Family is supposed to stick together." No return address. No sincerity. I folded it in half and used it to steady a wobbly leg on my workbench. Because here's what they'll never understand. Inheritance isn't about blood. It's about trust. And once trust is broken, no lawyer, no apology, no last-minute phone call can put it back together. Not in this lifetime. They didn't lose a fortune. They lost a father. A real one. And I lost nothing. Except the illusion that they ever cared. Some men buy yachts because they're chasing something. Youth, status, the illusion of control. I bought mine because I was finally done being chased. I called her the Lenore. Not flashy. Not big enough to turn heads at the marina, but just right for a man who wanted to drift without explanation. 38 feet of teak and steel, with worn leather seats and a galley that smelled faintly of salt and old coffee grounds. Austin helped me refurbish it. Said it was the only time he'd ever seen me smile without hiding it. We sailed for the first time on a gray Thursday morning. The sky looked like wet paper and the waves were mild, obedient. I stood at the helm, hands steady, heart strangely light. The wind didn't care about inheritance. The ocean didn't care about betrayal. Out here, no one asked questions, and no one lied to your face while plotting behind your back. For the first time since Lenore passed, I wasn't haunted. I was free. I spent my mornings with strong coffee and my logbook. Afternoons watching the horizon lean and fall, nights listening to water knock gently against the hull. I made peace with things I used to fight. The silence, the ache in my legs, the empty chair across the table. And I started to write. Not letters, not revenge plans, just truth. Stories about my childhood in Missouri. About the first time I saw Lenore braid her hair on the porch. About the sound clocks make when they're almost fixed, that soft hitch of resistance before everything falls into place. I left the pages unsealed, tucked in a drawer in the captain's cabin. Maybe someone will find them someday. Maybe not. Either way, they're mine. A month into the voyage, I docked briefly at a small harbor town, just long enough to stretch my legs and buy some fresh bread. As I was climbing back aboard, a young man, no older than Caleb had been when he still called me Dad, without resentment, called out, "Hey sir, beautiful boat, yours?" I smiled. "All mine." He nodded, gave a thumbs up and walked away. Simple, uncomplicated, honest. Later that evening, I sat on the stern with my journal and a cheap pen. I wrote something I hadn't said aloud until then. Let them keep the house. I have the sea. Let them fight over things that rust. I'll chase sunsets instead. Back in Stillwater, I imagine the grass is overgrown now. I imagine Caleb drives by the house and can't bring himself to park. I imagine Scarlett avoids the farmer's market altogether. But none of it matters. Their war is over. And they lost. Because here's the thing about revenge. It isn't about destruction. It's about reclamation. It's about taking back the parts of yourself they thought they could rewrite. They tried to define me as old, weak, disposable. I defined myself as free. One night, while anchored near a quiet inlet, I stood at the bow barefoot, the cold salt air biting at my face. I looked up at the stars and whispered, "We did it, Lenore." Not because she could hear me, but because I could finally hear myself. Not long after, Austin radioed in, said the scholarship fund had its first class of students, watchmakers, just like us. Said one kid even fixed a marine chronometer on his first try. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the receiver. "Tell him," I said, "time's on his side." As the weeks rolled on, I stopped counting days. I measured time in sunrises. I stopped waiting for apologies that would never come. I stopped reading emails. I stopped checking locks, because I didn't need to anymore. Everything I cared about was either already honored or already behind me. And the ocean, the wide, endless, unapologetic ocean, didn't ask me to explain. It just let me be. Maybe you've never been betrayed by your own blood. Maybe you've never sat in a quiet house wondering how people you raised, people you loved, could look at you like a burden. But if you have, if you felt that sting, that silence, that hollow echo of being left behind, then you understand why Ellis walked away with nothing but a name on a boat, and still won. Because sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers, "I survived you." And that whisper is louder than anything they'll ever say. It's easy to think stories like this are just fiction, just drama. But for some of us, it's memory, it's real. It's the slow, quiet war of dignity versus disrespect. And maybe today, you're not on a yacht or holding a legal folder. Maybe you're just sitting at your kitchen table, wondering if you still matter. You do. You always have. And don't ever let anyone, not your children, not your spouse, not your past, make you forget that. Now I want to hear from you. If you were in Ellis's shoes, would you have stayed and endured it all? Or would you have left it behind and taken the ocean for yourself? What does freedom look like to you? Tell us in the comments. Like this video if the story moved you. Share it with someone who needs to remember their worth. And subscribe to Revenge is Mine, because next week, someone else will reclaim their power. And you won't want to miss it.